欢迎收听 Area Ruler 的图书讲座。
에리아 박 토크에 오신 것을 환영합니다.
이리야 루아의 북 토크에 요코소.
Welcome to the Area Ruler Book Talks.
Good morning or afternoon to everyone also from my side. I am, as I was introduced, Hannes Mosler here at the University of Duisburg-Essen, a professor for Korean politics and society. I'm chairing the event, talking to Professor Jin-Wook about his latest publication. Before I do so, please allow me, give me a second or maybe two to give you a brief introduction of our guest. Dr. Shin is a professor, as we heard, in the Department of Sociology at Chung-Ang University in Seoul. He completed his studies at Yonsei University and earned then his PhD from Freie Universität Berlin here in Germany. And now being at the Chung-Ang University, very nice university, by the way, he teaches courses on political sociology, social movements, and social problems. And his research interests, which are very wide, include topics such as democratic theory, party politics, social movements, social inequalities, and the welfare state. So the whole spectrum, very exciting. And it is well known that Professor Shin is widely regarded as one of South Korea's leading sociologists. And so I'm even more happy and very much appreciate that you found the time, Professor Shin, for being with us here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this program.
Wonderful. And I think you just recently got a new haircut. You look younger than me. That's incredible by all the work you're doing. Now, the book that we will be discussing shortly carries the title, as you all know from the announcement, Democracy and Human Rights in the Kim Dae-jung Era, even though, as you will know in a second, its contents go far beyond that period of the Kim Dae-jung era. It's an edited volume with 6 chapters, and it also addresses the philosophical beliefs, the political ideas, the policies, and the achievements of former President Kim Dae-jung, with a particular focus on his dedication to democracy, human rights, and peace. And of course, how these ideas and these legacies look like reflect in present-day developments in South Korea and around the peninsula. And I'm sure we hear more about this in a bit, but just to complete the introduction of the book, the authors of the 6 chapters come from diverse academic backgrounds: history, sociology, political science, and the law. So we can expect a quite unique interdisciplinary perspective on all these topics. But I'm talking too much. Just one last comment about how we proceed. We just heard that from Kerstin already, but we'll have a talk now, Professor Shin and I, about the book, and afterwards then the audience will have the opportunity to ask questions. Alternatively, you can also put those questions in the chat and then we can take them from there. But now, Professor Shin, let us begin by talking about the background of this publication. The book is part of a research collection on the Kim Dae-jung era. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what the central idea behind this collection is. So could you tell us about the purpose and the vision maybe of this research series?
Yes, thank you. I'm the editor of the book, as you introduced, Democracy and Human Rights in the Kim Dae-jung Era. And I'm also one of the research experts at the Kim Dae-jung Academy, which planned the whole book series, including Democracy and Human Rights. So I think to explain the research series, it would be appropriate to first provide a brief introduction to the Kim Dae-jung Academy. The Academy was established in September 2022, 2 years ago. At the time of its founding, we started with 23 advisors and 46 47 research fellows, and among the advisors were some many internationally renowned historians, philosophers, and social scientists, including Bruce Cummings, John Donne, Anthony Giddens, Hans-Dieter Klingemann, and Wada Haruki. And as you know, Kim Dae-jung is known as a politician, but the Kim Dae-jung Academy is not affiliated with any specific political party and does not advocate any particular political stance. The primary aim of the academy is to advance the values pursued by Kim Dae-jung, such as democracy, human rights, peace, and gender equality through academic research. So the academy's activities, of course, also include research on Kim Dae-jung's life and his political activities, but the focus is on the social values. So since its establishment 2 years ago, one of the academy's most significant undertakings has been the publication of book series. So including this book, Democracy and Human Rights. Today, 4 volumes have been published. The first published volume was The Philosophy and Thought of Kim Dae-jung, followed by the second volume, this book, Democracy and Human Rights. And the title of the third volume was The Cultural Politics of Kim Dae-jung. And the fourth was Kim Dae-jung and Gender Equality. So have been published, and upcoming books now to be published. The book series will address for example, diplomatic and security policies and the economic and welfare policies of the Kim Dae-jung administration. So while many of the authors of these two series are academic scholars at the university, but contributors also include social movement activists and the former policymakers at the Kim Dae-jung government. Yeah. So this book, Democracy and Human Rights, has been published in this context.
Oh, that's very interesting. But I think either a cat is walking in front of your camera, or maybe it's a paper. But we from time to time you're disappearing into a white. Maybe I don't know something with your camera. Yeah, maybe. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay,
wonderful. So so the background.
Yeah, like this.
Yeah. So the background is the Kim Dae-jung Academy that is hosting more or less this series of books, and you're saying that coming 2 more coming also on foreign policies. So this will be very interesting. But you are the editor of this book, not of the others, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I see.
And the editor only for the book, Democracy and Human Rights.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Otherwise, that would be too much work, right?
No.
To cover all these wide topics. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Having a Kim Dae-jung Academy that produces the series of books regarding to all the different areas that President Kim Dae-jung was active in. And by the way, for those who don't know, Kim Dae-jung was president between the end of the 1998 and 2003. And so this connects to the next question I have. Why? I mean, it makes sense. We have the Kim Dae-jung Academy, and then we have this book series. But so, what is the reason? Why is Kim Dae-jung's political legacy still so important for Korean society today? Maybe you can talk about the most important marks that President Kim Dae-jung has left on Korean democracy and human rights.
Yes, this is the reason why we write and read Kim Dae-jung today. Yeah, so focusing solely on the topic of the legacy of Kim Dae-jung, I think we could organize a 2-day international symposium. So this reflects the immense political and cultural impact Kim Dae-jung had on South Korea and the world. And I would like to highlight Kim Dae-jung's contribution to Korean society in 3 key aspects, namely cultural reform, value change, and secondly, institutional reform, and thirdly, policy reform. So I'd like to begin with the first, as a sociologist, I find it particularly significant that social values such as democracy and human rights, liberties, and peace and gender equality became central to South Korea's institutions and culture, starting in the Kim Dae-jung era, his administration from 1998 to 2003. Why this value change is so important? It is because for decades in the 20th century, speaking about and pursuing these values were oppressed by dictators in South Korea. It was marginalized and repressed institutional center in South Korea. But Kim Dae-jung and his colleagues in the democratization movement defended these values against such repression. And ultimately, the democratization in 1987 and Kim Dae-jung's election as president in 1997, these values, I think, became foundational to South Korean politics and society. So, of course, even now, there are still numerous extremist groups in South Korea that challenge these values. But I think it is clear that the value landscape of South Korean society has fundamentally changed since the era of Kim Dae-jung government. That was the first point. And secondly, reform. The Kim Dae-jung administration and the Democratic Party implemented reform legislation and government policies in the most comprehensive scale since democratization in 1987. And I think from the present standpoint, Kim Dae-jung's institutional reform was the largest scale and the most radical in comparison to other administrations after Kim Dae-jung's era. I can say that many of the key institutional pillars of today's Korean society were established during this period of Kim Dae-jung administration. Notable examples, for example, include the basic livelihood security system in Korea. This is Korea's premier public assistance program. And secondly, the national health insurance system, which is regarded the country's most advanced welfare program. And also the tripartite commission for social dialogue between labor, management, business, and the government. And finally, also the Nonprofit Organizations Support Act, which provides a legal basis for public funding of civil society organizations. All these institutional reforms have been accomplished during the Kim Dae-jung administration. And finally, the third point is party politics reform. So from the perspective of party politics, I think Kim Dae-jung was the first leader in post-democratization Korea to pursue the development of political parties centered on social values and policy programs. Korea had experienced decades of Japanese imperial rule and subsequent military dictatorship. The result, even after democratization, the party systems and voter alignments were not based on political goals and policy programs, but primarily on primordial regionalism, 전라도, 경상도, 호남, 영남, or corrupt clientelism on the regional basis. But Kim Dae-jung aimed to develop political parties grounded in universal values, struggling to translate them into actionable policies within certain limitations. So I think although Kim Dae-jung also engaged in regional base, so 전라도, 호남, to some extent, but he made significant efforts to nurture a new generation of politicians who would break away from this past. That was my assessment of the legacy of Kim Dae-jung on Korean culture, politics, and institutions. Thank you.
Yeah, right. I mean, we have to keep in mind that he was not only a great person, a big intellectual actually also, but also he was the first president after decades of dictatorship, then the first civil government under Kim Il-sung before him, but he was the first president from the opposition, really then trying to accomplish these large numbers of reforms that you just mentioned. And so it doesn't come with a surprise that we have a lot of deep legacy still here. So at least to me, it makes sense to have a book series on what he did, what he accomplished, and how far we are developed. Yeah, how far we were able to apply this thinking in today's Korea. Okay, but now let's let's move on to the book's overall content. So why don't you give us an overview, an introduction of how the book is structured? I already talked about the 6 chapters and maybe the key aspects. So a general overview over the organization of the book.
There are. First, I'd like to explain the purpose of the book, the overall purpose of this book, and common points emphasized by the authors. The authors of the book compose of 6 chapters. We have several meetings during the early stages of research to establish and make consensus on the intentions and key emphasis of the book. So we agreed on the following some principles. Firstly, we study Kim Dae-jung and his administration from the perspective of values, as I emphasized before, such as democracy, human rights, and equality. And secondly, we maintain a critical perspective and academic rigor, avoiding a one-sided focus on the positive contributions of Kim Dae-jung and his government. And the third point is that we prioritize the question of what implications Kim Dae-jung and his administration have for contemporary South Korea and the world. And the fourth and last point is that we strive to effectively communicate with younger generations of readers who did not experience dictatorship and the era of Kim Dae-jung administration. So based on these general principles, we have agreed. The authors concentrated on several key themes, including the 6 points: Kim Dae-jung's political life and democratization struggles. This is for the chapter 4, the first chapter. Secondly, the quality of democracy in South Korea after democratization in 1987. And thirdly, Kim Dae-jung's role in shaping South Korea's party politics after democratization. And fourthly, participatory democracy and collaborative governance. And the fifth point is the development of human rights protection systems during Kim Dae-jung administration. And lastly, evaluating South Korean democracy from the perspective of international comparison. So to summarize, if we were to identify some key themes that run through this book, they would include democracy, human rights, freedom, equality, participation, civil society, and collaborative governance between the government and civil society.
All right. Yeah. So this is really, I mean, it makes sense that you edited the book. It's all the topics that you're also working on, as I know. And what is interesting, I mentioned it briefly in the beginning, that the different authors also, I mean, except one, they're all renowned academics from Korea. And they bring in these diverse academic backgrounds that I mentioned earlier. So how does this interdisciplinary approach enhance our understanding of democracy and human rights? So what was the thinking behind this interdisciplinary mix?
Yeah, that's a good question, I think. Yeah, indeed, this multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary collaboration is one of the greatest strengths of this book, I think. So a total of 6 scholars participated in the writing of this book, with expertise spanning history, political science, and sociology, constitutional law. So this is very diverse. And as experienced scholars, we have long been familiar with each other's academic work. We have already read the academic writings of each author, and we have also many experiences of collaboration on common subjects. And most importantly, I think this was personally a very good experience. The mutual trust and respect we have for one another made it a great pleasure to work together on this book project. Building on this foundation, we held several seminars for the book, sharing and exchanging ideas from the initial planning phase through intermediate reviews to the final phases of writing. Yeah, and if time allows, I'd like to provide some more detailed explanation of how each chapter contributed to shaping the book's comprehensive views. Okay, yeah. The first chapter provides a historical account of South Korean politics. This is written by Han Hong-gu, is a very well-known historian in South Korea. And this chapter provides a historical description from the era of the first president of South Korea, Lee Seung-man, to Kim Dae-jung's election as president in 1997. This is a wide range of descriptions. Within this context, this chapter chronicles the lives of Kim Dae-jung and his comrades in the democratization movements under dictatorship. While all chapters are of a similar length, as you and as most knows, we have all similar length in each chapter, but only this chapter is about 3 times longer than the other chapters, as this establishes the historical background necessary to understand the subsequent chapters. So my respected author, Professor Han Hong-gu, honestly requested that the entire manuscript be included, and I, as the editor, allowed an exception. Yeah, that was the first chapter. And building on this foundation, the second and third chapters focus on aspects of political democracy and party politics. Then these chapters examine the achievements and limitations of democratic development and the institutionalization of party systems during the Kim Dae-jung administration from 1998 to 2003. And the fourth and fifth chapters shed a light on various social dimensions, societal dimensions, as well as the relationship between politics and society. And these chapters explore the participation of social movement organizations and labor unions in policymaking, as well as the development of laws and institutions aimed at protecting human rights in the field of labor, welfare, and gender. And finally, chapter 6, including all these diverse dimensions, evaluates the state of South Korean democracy since democratization from an international comparative perspective. And this chapter systematically analyzes South Korean democracy, how South Korean democracy progressed during the Kim Dae-jung administrations. And this chapter also reflects on South Korean democracy as instability and democratic backsliding in the subsequent years since the era of President Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun. So such was the structure of this book and the relations.
Yeah, that's very, I mean, that makes sense that you have a basis in the beginning, a rather longish chapter by Professor Han Hong-gu, who is, yeah, as you said, a very well-known and established historian in South Korea. And I mean, now you are laughing or smiling as the editor, and you're saying, yeah, we know each other so well, and we have this very good relationship. But I can imagine that working with all these other scholars, in particular with those one who demand a longer text, more space, maybe wasn't that easy. So you mentioned Han Hong-gu, Kim Dong-chun, and Kang Woo-jin, and
Kang
yourself.
Yeah.
And Han Sang-hee, I mean, all very well-known,
yeah, law
established
professor.
Scholars.
Yeah, and you, Hannes Mosler.
Yeah, and myself in the end, just trying to contribute to this great lineup of scholars from South Korea. I felt very honored when I was asked to do so, but that's not the important point. But now let's move forward. There are various issues, and I think we cannot talk about all the core ideas and values that you already briefly mentioned at the beginning. Let's focus on, for example, the human rights, which is obviously plays a central role in the book, historically and presently, I could say. So maybe you could talk a little bit about which specific rights or freedoms are highlighted as most essential and how they are protected or challenged. Maybe you can talk a little bit about this part.
Yeah. The issue of human rights and basic rights are critically discussed in several chapters of this book, warranting a more detailed explanation here. Using, as you know, Thomas Marshall's well-known typology of citizenship, rights can broadly categorized into civil rights and political rights and social rights. And Marshall described that in England, in the case of the history of England, civil rights came first, and political rights came next, and social rights were the latest to be achieved. But I think inside South Korea, the sequence appears to differ from the experience of England. I mean, political rights were secured first with democratization in 1987, followed by the gradual improvements of civil rights, while social rights remain underdeveloped even today. That is the general view from in my interpretation. Firstly, about political rights in South Korea, as you know, the slogan of 1987 democratization movement, the June Uprising, was direct presidential elections. I think this has great meaning. The authoritarian regime had maintained its power by using indirect presidential elections to divide power among military elites and perpetuate dictatorship. And against this backdrop, the demand for direct presidential elections became the primary goal for ending dictatorship and achieving democracy. I think this demand fundamentally centered on political rights. So the right to vote, the freedom to form and join political parties, and the ability and the right to elect representatives based on these political rights. And this prioritization of political rights during South Korea's democratization movement process is, I think, historically significant. For Koreans have persistently pursued the right to elect their representatives and participate in politics and exercise people's sovereignty. I think South Koreans were particularly passionate in these aspects. This was evident, for example, in the independence movement in 1919 and the April Revolution of 1960, and then Gwangju Uprising in 1980, and the June Democratic Uprising 1987. And we may extend this view to the candlelight protest in 2008 and 2016 and 17. The most fundamental idea people have sought for was political rights in these aspects. But civil rights and social rights have developed relatively more slowly and remain still precarious even after democratization. Firstly, civil rights, as you know, pertain to individual freedoms and liberty, such as the freedom of speech and press freedom, freedom of thought and faith, and freedom of assembly and association, and the right to justice through due process of law. And this civil rights also, of course, include economic rights such as the right to own property and conclude contracts. And if we reflect on the history of South Korea, the authoritarian state emphasized and ensured from the beginning individual economic rights, but it restricted and suppressed other civil rights, including freedom of speech and press, thought and faith, assembly and association. All these rights have gradually improved after democratization in 1987. And in this historical context, the Kim Dae-jung administration marked a significant turning point, I think. For example, in the case of freedom of assembly and association, today in South Korea, tens of thousands of rallies and protests occur annually, allowing citizens to pursue their economic and political interests through collective behavior. And if we look at the statistical trends provided by the police, violent and illegal protests became rare. And also, policing strategies have shifted from suppression to negotiation and protection of these rights of assembly and demonstration. So, as a consequence, for example, during the candlelight protest in 2016, demanding president's resignation and impeachment, the government did not suppress the protests in 2016 and 17. So over 6 months, more than 10 million people participated in these resistance protest actions, but there was no arrest by the police and no instances of violence by the protest participants. And similarly, during President Moon Jae-in, a 5-year term, the large-scale right-wing 태극기 demonstration, as you know, occurred every weekend at the city center of Seoul, but without significant violence, and the police ensured the protesters' rights. All these advancements in right of collective action, assembly, and demonstration have begun during the Kim Dae-jung administration, I think. Yeah, but the right to protest remains pretty unstable in South Korea. For example, during the 2008 candlelight protests had occurred at the time against the U.S.-Korea agreement on the import of U.S. beef in South Korea. At that time, the Lee Myung-bak government arrested over 1,000 participants and injured more than 2,000 citizens through police violence. So at that time, due to the excessive police violence, Amnesty International, a well-known international human rights organization, dispatched a special investigator to South Korea to prepare a report. And this kind of police suppression we now are observing under Yoon Suk-yeol government. So this is the reason why we are worried at the present under Yoon Suk-yeol administration. And lastly, the social rights. Yeah, social rights encompasses economic welfare and security, and significant progress has been made since democratization. And notable milestones include the introduction of employment insurance system under Kim Young-sam administration, and most importantly, the establishment introduction of a basic livelihood security system and the national health insurance system under Kim Dae-jung administration. And finally, since the Roh Moo-hyun administration, various universal social services, including public care systems, have also been expanded. In this respect, Kim Dae-jung administration was a pivotal moment in all aspects of civil and political and social rights. Yeah, but in respect of social rights, South Korea has still very serious limitation in comparison to other welfare states in South Korea. So while all major political parties increasingly in South Korea acknowledge the importance of social welfare. A common characteristic of both conservative and Democratic Party was their emphasis on redistribution by welfare, public welfare on the one side, while neglecting workers' rights and safety in the primary distribution in economic areas on the other side. So even the Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun administrations, despite their focus on welfare policies, they implemented measures that exacerbated employment instability for workers. So consequently, the labor movement remains critical of the Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun administration until now.
Yeah, that's a good point that you're making there in the end, a very important one, and that refers to another question I had. So you were talking now about the Kim Dae-jung administration, also the following liberal administration under Roh Moo-hyun. Both were very relatively progressive. They tried to implement these reforms, but they in a way stopped short. So, and you talked about the different political parties, which are more or less tied to government and opposition camp. But so what about civil society? So what's the role of civil society? Of course, also in the process of democratization, but maybe even more importantly afterwards. So under Kim Dae-jung and maybe even towards today. So what does the book tell us about civil society organizations and that part of the story? If we talk about political parties and the government administration, so what's the role of civil society and how does the book shed light on this aspect?
Yes, yes, indeed. In South Korea, the democratic movements made a decisive contribution to the decades-long struggle against dictatorship, and also during the democratic transition from the end of dictatorship to democratic consolidation. For example, in the 1960s and 70s, leading actors of the democratization movements were not only politicians, but primarily university students and churches, religious leaders, and journalists, intellectuals, and so on. And also in the 1980s, the organizational power of university students struggle grew particularly stronger. And also the workers' movements began to take political struggle against dictatorship. Then after the introduction of democracy, this is more important in our context now, the political opportunity structures for civil society have greatly expanded. Yeah, this is a natural consequence of the end of dictatorship. So not only has the oppression by political power been weakened, but also the institutional centers such as the government and the parliament, political parties, the business, and the media have become more open and friendly to cooperation with civil society. As a reaction to such changes of social and political environment, new trends of reform movements grew up after democratization, relying on a moderate, relatively more moderate means of action, and putting more importance to gaining support from so-called ordinary people, ordinary citizens, and they call themselves citizen movements, 시민운동, to distinguish themselves from more radical movements before and after democratization. These 시민운동, citizens movements, became a crucial actor in the whole reform process in diverse issue areas, including political reform after democratization, and gender equality, and environmental policy, social welfare, etc. And in particular, organizations with rich resources have replaced much of the role which normally the government and political parties are expected to play in advanced representative democracy. Good examples are the so-called, this is the term given by Professor Sociologist Jo Hee-yeon, comprehensive movement organizations with a comprehensive broad range of fields of activities, such as Gyeongsilyeon, Citizens Coalition for Economic Justice, and 참여연대, People's Solidarity for Participatory Democracy, and also equally influential were the huge nationwide organizations in particular movement issue areas such as 여성단체연합, Korean Women's Association United, and 환경운동연합, Korean Federation for Environmental Movements. The special contribution, all these civil society organizations, especially 시민운동, social movement organizations have made to Korean democracy was that they took the lead in important policy innovation and institutional reform. So including significant reforms for extending and reinforcing civil liberties and reform legislations about gender equality and so on. So this made this young democracy of South Korea more responsive to the needs and desires of the people. That was the overall story of the role of civil society, their contribution about 15 or 20 years after democratization in 1987. And my second point is that we have different patterns after 2000, after the 2000s. This is distinguished from, as I just mentioned, this is different from the political landscape for about 20 minutes after democratization. The difference is that a series of spontaneous and decentralized large-scale protest movements called candlelight protest, 촛불 집회, arose many times since the late 2000s until the candlelight protest in 2016 and 17. And common to all these large-scale protest events were the demands of better representation of public opinion by the political representatives of the country and more direct participation of citizens in policy processes. Moreover, they wanted to make sure that the elected representatives are legitimate only when they are subordinated to constitutional values. This is the, again, emphasis of societal values that citizens have pursued after democratization. And finally, these new action repertoires, to use the sociological terminology, these new action repertoires and ways of action by the candlelight protests have extended to the right-wing populist movements since the late 2010s. So the 태극기 집회, the right-wing large-scale protest actions that persisted during the whole 5-year term of Moon Jae-in government, they adopted many part of the action repertoires and discourses and core symbols of 촛불 집회, relatively right-wing protest. This is the new situation of South Korean politics, and this explains why the populist movements on the left and right-wing side are exerting so great influence upon the party politics and government elites in South Korea today.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you're saying that you're now talking about these three periods, I could say. So this period of democratization way into the 1990s, where we have large-scale demonstrations, students, workers, and so on. And then after democratization, maybe after 10 years, more or less with the beginning of the Kim Dae-jung administration, actually, we then see the development a little bit earlier, I guess in the middle of the 1990s, we see this development of institutionalization of the social movement into these civil society organizations, right? That you mentioned, CCAJ, PSPD.
Yes.
By the way, Professor Shin has been very heavily involved in the activities of PSPD. So you are also part of that. You're a witness of that development.
I'm experiencing the changes in
Yeah. So very exciting that we have a living witness here. So and then this is the as I understood correctly, so we have this second period where we have this institutionalization in these NGOs or civil society organizations, but then you said with the 2000s, again, more or less it's a repetition of history, maybe that's too much, of this action repertoire of demonstrations, maybe different, but still it's this large scale phenomena, right? Plus the bifurcation of civil social movement into left and right, progressive and conservative, which has not been the case before. So this seems to be very, very interesting. And yeah, maybe it's a sign that there is a need for South Korean democracy of large-scale demonstrations again, like in times of democratization. But we can talk about this a little bit more in a bit. So let's also talk a little bit about the international perspective. I'm very curious what you think about the chapter that provided. Was that of any use? So what are the characteristics of the international perspective on Kim Dae-jung and Korean democracy and society?
Yeah. There are several, better than I about this international assessment of democracy as a political scientist. As I know, there are several prominent surveys that evaluate democracy internationally, including the varieties of democracy, the so-called Sweden project from the Göteborg University in Sweden, and Freedom House annual report of freedom ratings, and the Bertelsmann Transformation Index. This is focused in German, led by German scholars, and also the Economist Intelligence Unit's Democracy Index, and also additionally the Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom Index is also widely recognized internationally, I think. And when focusing on VDEM and Bertelsmann Transformation Index, I see two distinct trends emerge. The first trend is the period from democratization in 1987 through the Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun administration until 2003. This is, as I told, about 15 to 20 minutes after 20 years after democratization in 1987. And the second period is from the Lee Myung-bak and Park Geun-hye administration to the current Yoon Suk-yeol administration. I see two different trends in these two periods. The earlier period started from a low baseline of democracy in 1987, following the end of dictatorship, but all indicators showed slowly upward trends from the point of 1987 to the period of Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun administration, and notably the peaceful transition of power to the Kim Dae-jung administration in 1997. That was regarded internationally as the successful democratic consolidation in South Korea. As Samuel Huntington has conceptualized, this two times peaceful change of power may be regarded as a firm democratic consolidation. And there's little possibility to return to the outright dictatorship. And this sign was the election of Kim Dae-jung as president in South Korea. And during his presidency of Kim Dae-jung, indices of democracy, freedom, and human rights experienced the greatest improvement, I think, after democratization in South Korea. But by the later years of Roh Moo-hyun administration, about 2010 2005, 2006, 7, and the prevailing belief was that democracy in South Korea has become irreversible. Many people thought at the time, now democracy and human rights, freedom in South Korea are irreversible, even if the conservative parties seize the power in the future. But during the Lee Myung-bak and Park Geun-hye administration, all indicators of democracy and freedom regressed sharply to levels seen between 1991 and 1994, with a significant backsliding even in the most fundamental electoral democracy indicators. So during the Moon Jae-in administration, these indices recovered to levels seen under Roh Moo-hyun, but with the onset of the Yoon Suk-yeol administration, they have once again fallen to levels observed under Lee Myung-bak and Park Geun-hye administration. Then our next question is why? Why Korean democracy is backsliding so sharply after the mid-2000s under conservative administrations? So explaining why South Korean democracy has become so unstable is a very difficult question. It's a challenging task for social scientists. Nevertheless, I observed a very interesting recurring pattern in South Korean politics over the past 2 decades, since the mid-2000s, starting around the middle of the Roh Moo-hyun administration. The story is like this. Under Democratic Party governments, political democracy and freedom improved. But the failure to address economic inequality and the economic problems of the lower classes leads to a significant loss of support of this government. This results in a transfer of power to conservative governments, during which democracy again deteriorates. Then the resulting public grievance prompts a return to Democratic Party rule, under which democracy recovers again. But again, growing economic inequality and instability paves the way for the return of the conservative governments like Yoon Suk-yeol, leading to renewed democratic backsliding. So this pattern has been recurring since the mid or late term of Roh Moo-hyun administration. And this does not mean that the economic issues improve under conservative governments. For instance, the real estate price surge during the Moon Jae-in administration began in the later years of the Park Geun-hye administration. And under the present Yoon Suk-yeol administration, real estate prices rose even higher than during Moon Jae-in's presidency. But interestingly, this is a very interesting point. According to prior studies by political scientists, this worsening inequality and worsening economic status of lower classes does not politically damage conservative parties, but when inequality intensifies under Democratic Party governments, frames such as hypocrisy and disillusionment take hold, leading to significant voter defection from their base. So, in contrast, under conservative governments, the contraction of democracy and freedom and the problems with governance caused by the abuse of presidential power tend to alienate their supporters, especially the so-called medium voters, 중도파, from the governing elites. So in general, I can say that the international assessment of Korean democracy reached its peak during the Kim Dae-jung administration, and then became increasingly ambivalent and unstable.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, if you look at these indices, they go up and down depending on what government is in power. according to the ideology, as you just said. It's highly interesting. Also, if you look at other countries for the same period, they are all, I mean, the overall trend internationally is a decline in the quality of democracy. But for the Korean case, it's really going up and down, a very high fluctuation. And as you just mentioned, this is closely tied to this, still a conundrum. I mean, how do you explain this psychology, right, of the electorate supporting the one camp, the conservative camp, for those reasons, but don't hold them responsible for the same mistakes or lack of policies regarding distribution of wealth. Yeah, highly complicated. I don't think we will solve the issue right here. But just a last question, maybe regarding this, directly connected to this, or 1.5 questions, because you were talking about the current government, which in the VDEM index and the varieties of government indexes already at some point already beneath the level of quality of democracy of Park Geun-hye, which is difficult to achieve. Already in his 3rd year, he achieved this. What are the main causes? I mean, in connection to what you already said, for the current administration under Yoon Suk-yeol. So, I mean, it's the same pattern, but it's very extreme. And I mean, we all knew, but so nevertheless, it happened. So what's your take on that?
It's becoming more and more extreme.
Right, please go ahead.
It's becoming more and more extreme. And the tempo of democratic backsliding is accelerated. From the period of Lee Myung-bak through the Park Geun-hye administration and now Yoon Suk-yeol. Within 2 years, the international ranking of Korean democracy and freedom has fallen dramatically within 1 year or 2 years. And again, this question why is very, very difficult for you and for me, for every political scientist and political sociologist. Is very complex, and as you just mentioned, this is very complicated, multidimensional phenomenon. And I'd like to first mention about I'd like to check the state of Korean democracy now under Yoon Suk-yeol government, because the evaluation of the state of Korean democracy differ considerably depending on party preference. I made about this subject many collaborative work with political scientists, and our consistent finding is that it depends on what political party and what politician you prefer to. So if you like Yoon Suk-yeol, then you think the state of democracy now is very good. And during the Moon-jae-in's presidential term, the state of Korean democracy was the most the most serious state. So it depends on the political preference and inclination of each voter about this evaluation. So for that reason, in the domestic discursive context in South Korea, it is very important to give evidence that South Korean democracy and freedom is now in crisis, to show that South Korean democracy is now in crisis. I'd like to again rely on the assessment by international expertise. For example, a VDEM report in 2024, this year, and South Korea ranked 47th in the Liberal Democracy Index in the 2024 report by the VDEM Institute, placing it in the top 25% of all surveyed countries this year. This marks a steep decline from last year's report, where South Korea was ranked 28th, and nearly a 20-spot drop within 1 year. And the report says that among countries categorized as liberal democracies, South Korea was the only one that experienced such a dramatic democratic backsliding compared to previous years. And even more shocking is that from 2019 to 2021, under the Moon Jae-in government, South Korea consistently ranked 17th or 18th in the index, in the liberal democracy index, outperforming Japan, Taiwan, and France, and ranking significantly higher than the United States under Donald Trump. But in just the past 1 or 2 years, its ranking has plummeted dramatically. This is very interesting and surprising development in South Korean politics. And even more, the severity of South Korean democratic backsliding becomes clearer, I think, when examining the specific areas where regression has been most significant. The VDEM report evaluates democracy across 5 dimensions, electoral democracy and liberal, egalitarian and participatory, and deliberative democracy. And South Korea's lowest international ranking was in the electoral democracy index, where it placed the 5th globally. And this index includes indicators such as freedom of expression, freedom of press, and freedom of association. Namely, these are fundamental civil liberties and prerequisites for democratic elections. It means without these freedoms, even regular normal elections cannot ensure fair competition and voters' choice. So many Koreans are not aware of this seriousness of democratic backsliding in South Korea, I think. And then we return to the question why. This is my final explanation. It is difficult to answer the why question, but I can say that the primary institutional condition for this democratic regression lies in the excessive concentration of power in the presidency. This is the characteristic in South Korean political system. In such a system, if the situation is like this, in such a system, if a president like Kim Dae-jung, who valued democracy and human rights, whose philosophy, the core philosophy was democracy and human rights and freedom, if such a president comes to power, then rapid institutional improvements are possible, as seen in South Korea's earlier democratic advancements after 1987. But when a president disregards or is unaware of democratic norms and values, then this concentration of power becomes extremely dangerous. So a president can exploit the government's administrative apparatus and coercive institutions, including the prosecution, the police, information agency, and propaganda units of the military for political purposes. All this happened under Park Geun-hye administration. For this reason, Park Geun-hye had to experience impeachment. Now, President Yoon Suk-yeol repeat this story again. And furthermore, close associates of the president may wield power equal to and even greater than the president, resulting in to use the terminology in political science, resulting in a tutelary regime. So without effective checks from the parliament, judiciary, or civil society, presidential power may extend to the president's close aides, friends, and family, wife, and so on and so on. Yeah, this is what we are observing in South Korean politics. So this abuse of power is perpetuated and is intensified further by electoral dynamics. this is a new phenomenon, I think. I mean, dissatisfaction and anger with the previous administration often lead to a desire for change from the side of the voters. And once a new government is elected, then it exercises power to undo all its predecessors' policy and destroy the political resources of the opposition parties. Moreover, as electoral politics become increasingly polarized, this is a political affective polarization. Voters and party members prioritize the question of who will win above all else. And in such an environment, people are often willing to support undemocratic candidates if they are perceived as capable of winning in the election, believing the opposing candidate to be even more dangerous. For example, Lee Jae-myung is more dangerous than Yoon Suk-yeol, then I vote for Yoon Suk-yeol, like this. And the supporters of Lee Jae-myung think the same thing. So we support Lee Jae-myung, even if he has many problems, because Yoon Suk-yeol is so dangerous. So this dynamic exacerbates the problem as the focus shifts from democratic principles to electoral victory. This is the specific political mechanisms or dynamics which resides behind the democratic backsliding in South Korea, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I think these are the you could say the wicked characteristics of Korean-style political polarization, right? So this would be the overall term. But yeah, it's very important what you mentioned about these mechanisms producing a kind of vicious circle. And in between all these political ambitions and interests, we have the people, the voters, who always think it looks greener on the other side of the river, right? So this time it didn't work out, so we vote for somebody else. Yeah, highly complicated.
Yes.
But
it's a kind of situation of deadlock.
Yes,
yeah,
it is indeed. And it's quite worrying. So very quickly, before we open to the floor and take the questions from our listeners, so this looks very bleak, right? In particular with this administration, very dark. So, but since we're talking about President Kim Dae-jung, who wasn't perfect either, but as you said, who was the first president who really also pushed democracy, the quality of democracy, and introduced all this important civil society, had a much bigger say. He cooperated with civil societal actors and so on and so forth. So the beginning, more or less, of real democracy in South Korea. We talked about this, and this book is about him. So what, let's say, when readers finish the book, what central insight or inspiration would you like to take away, in particular in these times? Very quickly, and then we come to the questions.
Why we that's the question. Why we study, write, and read Kim Dae-jung now? The subject of today's book talk is democracy in the Kim Dae-jung era. So reflecting on Kim Dae-jung's political life and his administration from the present standpoint. We are often struck by a sense of ambivalence, I think. The two sides, if we reflect on the history from the era of Kim Dae-jung to the present, on the one hand, we see a history of victory. This is a triumphant description, narrative of history, where the seemingly invincible military dictatorship was ultimately brought down by the dedication and sacrifice and solidarity of people, leading to the dramatic expansion of democracy and human rights and freedom in South Korea. And as we all know, South Korea have been internationally recognized as a successful case of democratic transition and consolidation. People say we don't see any possibility of return to dictatorship in South Korea. This is a very different situation in many other countries that experience dictatorship and have experienced transition to democracy. But on the other side, we are witnessing a history of regression. You have just mentioned democratic backsliding, and the tempo of backsliding is even more and more accelerated. So these hard-won achievements in democracy and freedom in South Korea are being rapidly undermined, accompanied by abuses of power, restrictions of freedom, and even more, an alarming increase in violent backlash against the human rights of poor people, against women, against migrants and sexual minorities. This is what we are observing in South Korea today. It's a very worrying situation in Korea since about 10 years. This is the major trends in South Korean politics and cultural landscape, I think. So today, in this situation, I would like to remind you of two of the lifelong mottos of Kim Dae-jung. One is be conscious in action. This is well known. Yeah, 행동하는 양심. Conscience in action is important for us everyone. Kim Dae-jung has emphasized. I interpret this to mean that we must remain moral beings in all these pessimistic circumstances and have to act to preserve that dignity. And the other motto is that this is also President Kim Dae-jung saying, politics is like making a lotus flower bloom in the mud. This is also very well known among South Koreans. He always emphasized that politics is reality. And we are idealists, but ideas alone can never realize ideas. He was really idealist. Many people say Kim Dae-jung is very rare politician who had his philosophy. He pursued lifelong his values like democracy and freedom, equality, but he was also a realist. And important point is that ideas alone can never realize ideas. We need the art of politics, the wisdom of politics, which brings together people with different interests, different ideas in different situations to improve the direction of the whole society. So I think it seems today the effort for gathering our conscience and courage on the one side and political wisdom on the other side in this way is more important and urgent than ever before. So that was my last sentence. Thank you.
Yes, great. Yeah, wonderful. This I actually think is a very good wrap up of our conversation about this book on Kim Dae-jung's political thought and actions and policies and his legacy for today's South Korea, at least.